We've been out here for days. I don't know how much longer we can last. I saw what it did to the others.
I've been hunting at night for 12 years. Deer, wild boar, foxes, whatever needed culling on the Highland estates. I knew every sound the darkness made, every shadow that moved in the forest, every trick the mind plays when you're alone in the cold with a rifle. But what I encountered during the winter culling season of 2024 wasn't an animal. It wasn't human either. And by the time I understood what was hunting alongside me in those woods, 3 people were already dead. My name is Marcus Reed. I'm a professional game warden and licensed night hunter working across the Scottish Highlands. This is what happened on the Blackwood Estate between December 15th and January 3rd. I'm telling this story because the police don't believe me. My colleagues think I've lost my mind, and whatever is out there in those woods is still waiting. It's waiting for someone else to come hunting. The Blackwood Estate sits in the most remote part of the Cairngorms, about 40 miles from Inverness. 15,000 acres of ancient forest, moorland, and hills that haven't changed in 1,000 years. The estate's been in the Morrison family since the 1600s, passed down through generations of wealthy landowners who use it for shooting parties and deer stalking. I'd worked Blackwood before, did a week of night culling back in 2022 without any problems. Good money, isolated work, exactly what I preferred. So when the estate manager, Graham Sutherland, called me in early December about an urgent culling contract, I didn't hesitate. Graham's voice over the phone was tense, professional. We had a serious problem with the red deer population. They were destroying the young trees, and neighboring estates were complaining about them breaking through fences. He needed someone who could work fast and quietly, night work only. The shooting parties during the day couldn't be disturbed. I asked him how many deer we were talking about. At least 30 heads over 3 weeks, he told me. Maybe more. He'd paid double my usual rate, plus accommodation in the estate cottage. I'd have the place to myself. Double rate meant nearly £4,000 for 3 weeks' work. I could take January off, maybe February too. I told him I'd be there on December 15th. I arrived at Blackwood Estate just after sunset on December 15th. The drive from my home in Fort William took 3 hours. The last 40 minutes on a single-track road that wound through dense forest. Snow had started falling that morning, and by the time I reached the estate gates, everything was white and silent. The cottage they'd arranged for me was about a mile from the main house. A small stone building with 2 rooms, a wood-burning stove, and no mobile phone signal. Perfect. I preferred isolation when I was working. Fewer distractions, better focus. Graham met me at the cottage with keys and a map of the estate. He pointed to marks on the map showing where the deer were concentrated. The North Wood, the Glen, and the moorland up near Cairn Ridge. I could start wherever I liked, but I needed to avoid the South Wood entirely. That's where the shooting parties would be during the day. He didn't want me to accidentally take down something they were planning to shoot. I asked if there were any particular bucks he wanted me to avoid. Trophy stags were worth keeping alive for the wealthy hunters who paid thousands for the privilege of shooting them. Graham shook his head. We were past that point, he said. The population was out of control. I should take what I could. Focus on the hinds, if possible. We needed to reduce breeding numbers. He handed me a radio. It worked better than phones out here, he explained. He was on channel 3 if I needed anything, I should check in every morning after my shift and let him know my numbers. Then he paused at the door. One more thing, he told me. I needed to stay out of the old wood. I looked at the map. There was no area marked Old Wood. Graham pointed to a section in the northeast corner of the estate, beyond Cairn Ridge. The map showed it as blank space. No trails marked, no landmarks. It wasn't technically part of the shooting estate anymore, he explained. The trees there were ancient, protected, but more importantly, the ground was unstable. Sinkholes, hidden ravines, that sort of thing. A gamekeeper broke his leg up there in the 90s, and they just left it alone now. I told him I understood. After Graham left, I unpacked my gear. My rifle was a Tikka T3X in .308, fitted with a thermal scope for night work. I also had a handheld thermal imager, a hunting knife, spare ammunition, and a heavy torch. Everything was clean, checked, and ready. I made a simple dinner, studied the map, and planned my route for the first night. I'd start in the North Wood, work my way toward the Glen, and see what I could find. With any luck, I'd take down 3 or 4 deer on the first night. By 10 p.m., I was dressed in full winter gear and heading into the forest. The North Wood was old-growth Scots pine, mixed with birch and rowan. The snow on the ground was about 6 inches deep, perfect for tracking. I moved slowly through the trees, scanning with the thermal imager every few minutes. The night was clear and cold, maybe -5 degrees. My breath fogged in front of me, and the only sounds were the soft crunch of snow under my boots and the occasional crack of a branch in the distance. At 11:30 p.m., I spotted my first group of deer, 5 hinds and a young stag, about 200 meters away, feeding near the edge of a clearing. I set up behind a fallen log, steadied the rifle, and waited for a clean shot. The thermal scope showed their heat signatures clearly, bright white shapes against the cold background. I picked the largest hind, exhaled slowly, and squeezed the trigger. The shot echoed through the forest. The hind dropped immediately, a clean kill through the heart and lungs. The others scattered into the trees. I waited 10 minutes before approaching. That's standard procedure. Make sure the animal is dead. Let the others clear the area. When I reached the hind, I confirmed the kill, tagged it with my marker, and made a note of the location. I'd come back in the morning with Graham to collect it. 1 down, 29 to go. I continued deeper into the North Wood. The forest felt different the further I went. Quieter, darker, even though my torch cut through the shadows easily enough. The trees grew closer together here, their branches forming a canopy that blocked most of the moonlight. At 1 a.m., I found another group, 3 hinds this time, moving through a narrow ravine. I took up position on the ridge above them and made another clean shot, 2 down. But when I climbed down to tag the second deer, I noticed something odd. There were other tracks in the snow near the kill. Large tracks, canine-shaped, but bigger than any dog I'd seen. The prints were deep, indicating significant weight, and the stride was long. Whatever made them had been moving fast. I assumed it was a large fox, or possibly a wildcat, though the size seemed wrong for either. The Highlands had wolves once, centuries ago, but they'd been extinct in Scotland since the 1700s. I took a photo of the tracks with my phone, then continued hunting. By 3 a.m., I'd taken down 4 deer total and was heading back toward the cottage when I heard it for the first time. A howl, long, low, and mournful. It came from somewhere to the north, beyond the ridge. It didn't sound like any fox or dog I'd heard before. It was deeper, more resonant, almost human in its tone. I stopped walking and listened. The howl came again, closer this time. Then a response from the west. Another howl, different pitch, equally strange. I scanned the area with a thermal imager. Nothing showed up, except the cooling bodies of the deer I'd shot and the normal heat signatures of small animals in the undergrowth. The howling stopped as suddenly as it started. I waited another 10 minutes, then headed back to the cottage. The walk took 40 minutes, and I kept checking over my shoulder the whole way. I couldn't shake the feeling that something was pacing me through the trees, staying just out of sight. I radioed Graham at 8 a.m. 4 deer down in the North Wood. I told him I had locations marked. We could collect them this morning. Graham's voice crackled back. Good work. He'd bring the truck round at 9. I asked him if there were any large predators on the estate. Wolves, big cats, anything like that. There was a pause before he answered. No wolves in Scotland, he reminded me. I knew that. Why was I asking? I told him about the unusual tracks I'd found near one of the kills. Large canine prints, bigger than a dog. Probably just a stray from one of the farms, Graham said. People dumped dogs out here sometimes when they couldn't care for them anymore. If I saw it again, I should let him know. Lord Morrison didn't like strays on the estate. We collected the deer that morning. Graham didn't comment on the tracks, and I didn't push it. Maybe it really was just a stray dog. I slept until 6 p.m., then prepared for the second night. This time I'd work the Glen, a wide valley with open moorland on either side, better visibility, easier shooting. But before I left, I did something I don't usually do. I loaded extra ammunition. Instead of the usual 20 rounds, I packed 60. I also sharpened my hunting knife and tested the torch batteries twice. I told myself it was just caution, but deep down, I knew I was uneasy about those howls. The Glen was windswept and exposed. Snow whipped across the open ground, and visibility was poor, despite the thermal scope. I stayed close to the tree line, using the forest edge for cover. At midnight, I spotted a group of 8 deer moving down the valley. I set up for a shot, but before I could fire, they suddenly bolted, all of them running at full speed toward the south. Something had spooked them. I scanned with the thermal imager. At first, I saw nothing. Then, at the far end of the Glen, about 400 meters away, I picked up a heat signature. It was large, much larger than a deer, and it was moving on 4 legs, low to the ground, stalking along the tree line. I zoomed in as much as the imager allowed. The shape was canine, but the proportions were wrong. Too long in the body, too heavy in the shoulders. It moved with a strange, loping gait that didn't match any dog or wolf I'd seen in documentaries. As I watched, it stopped and raised its head. Even at that distance, through the thermal imager, I could see it was looking directly at me. My heart rate spiked. I lowered the imager and brought up the rifle scope. Through the thermal sight, the creature glowed bright white against the cold landscape. It didn't move. Neither did I. We stayed like that for what felt like 10 minutes, but was probably only 30 seconds. Then the creature turned and disappeared into the forest. I exhaled slowly, realizing I'd been holding my breath. I didn't fire. I didn't follow it. I just stood there, trying to process what I'd seen. A stray dog. That's what Graham said. But no dog was that size, and no dog moved like that. I decided to call it a night. I'd only taken 2 deer in the Glen before the encounter, but I didn't feel safe continuing. The walk back to the cottage took an hour, and I kept the rifle ready the entire time. When I finally got inside, I locked the door, loaded the wood stove, and sat by the window with the rifle across my lap. The howling started again at 4 a.m. This time, it was close, maybe 100 meters from the cottage. 3 distinct voices, calling and responding to each other in the darkness. I looked out the window but saw nothing. The howling continued for 20 minutes, circling the cottage, then fading toward the north, toward the old wood. I didn't sleep that day. I sat in the cottage, cleaning my rifle and watching the tree line. When Graham radioed at 8 a.m., I told him I'd taken 2 deer and would stay in that night to rest. His voice came back concerned. I sounded rough, he said. I should get some sleep. We were still ahead of schedule, but I wasn't planning to rest. I was planning to find out what was out there in those woods. And that night, I was going to the one place Graham told me not to go. I was going to the old wood. I spent the afternoon preparing. I packed extra batteries, 3 full boxes of ammunition, flares, and emergency supplies. I updated my map with notes about where I'd heard the howls and where I'd seen the creature in the Glen. All the sightings pointed toward the same area, the blank space on the map where the old wood was marked. I knew this was stupid. Graham had warned me. The ground was dangerous, the area was off limits, and I was supposed to be hunting deer, not investigating strange animals. But 12 years of night hunting had taught me one thing. When something feels wrong, it usually is. And everything about this job felt wrong now. The howls weren't normal. The tracks weren't normal. That creature in the Glen wasn't normal. At 10 p.m. on December 17th, I left the cottage with my rifle, my thermal gear, and a GPS unit I'd brought from home. I wasn't going to get lost out there. The walk to Cairn Ridge took 2 hours through deep snow. Beyond the ridge, the forest changed. The trees grew taller and older, their trunks thick and gnarled. The undergrowth was dense, and the snow lay undisturbed. No deer tracks, no animal signs at all. It was as if nothing lived here. I pushed deeper into the old wood, following a frozen stream that cut through the trees. The thermal imager showed nothing but cold forest and my own heat signature. Then, at 1:30 a.m., I found the clearing. It was circular, about 50 meters across, surrounded by ancient oaks that must have been hundreds of years old. The ground was bare, no snow, no vegetation, just dark earth that looked scorched. In the center of the clearing were bones, hundreds of them, deer, sheep, cattle, and something else. Larger bones, arranged in patterns I didn't understand. Skulls stacked in piles. Rib cages form archways. This wasn't natural. This was deliberate. I raised the rifle and scanned the clearing with the scope. Nothing moved. But I could smell something now. A thick animal musk mixed with rot. Then I heard breathing behind me. I spun around. 3 of them stood at the edge of the clearing. Huge, wolf-like creatures, but bigger than any wolf that ever lived. Their eyes reflected my torchlight, not red or green like normal animals, but yellow and bright, almost glowing. They didn't growl. They didn't snarl. They just watched me, heads low, muscles tense. I raised the rifle slowly, sighting the nearest one through the scope. Before I could fire, all 3 howled at once, a sound so loud and deep, it vibrated in my chest. And from the forest around me, Dozens more howls answered. I was surrounded. That's when I ran.